Good evening. Tonight, the housing crisis that plagues our city isn't going away anytime soon. So what is the answer? Labour's housing spokesman Phil Twyford is my guest, and Lynched starts right now. Good evening, Labour's housing spokesman Phil Twyford shortly, but first this week's memo to Christchurch. A record 1.25 million doses of the flu shot vaccine were distributed in New Zealand late last year. It'll be an even higher amount this year, and there are those who remain firmly against it, which is fine. But this year, protecting pregnant women and their babies is the focus of a new campaign, and healthcare professionals will be encouraged to remind eligible adults, including young people who have ongoing medical conditions, to consider free immunisation. Interestingly enough, on News Talk ZB last week, I was inundated with callers on both sides of the fence. One distraught woman recounted the story of a 21-year-old family member who was fit and healthy, played hockey, grass hockey that is, and even enjoyed life as we know it. But sadly, a powerful strain of influenza attacked her. She was dead within a week after being diagnosed. This caller said she was frustrated at people who were offered the vaccine for free, but chose not to take it. So here are the facts for you. According to MedSafe, in clinical studies, the flu jab was administered to over 1,000 subjects. And here's the important information you need to know. No serious adverse reactions relating to the vaccine were reported. Personal choice is important in this country, there's no doubt about it, but so too are the facts. And it's important not to let hysteria cloud the judgment of otherwise healthy people. And that's this week's memo to Christchurch. To other matters now. Well, it's no secret many Christchurch residents are doing it tough, aren't they? Struggling to find affordable accommodation, housing that is. And with winter fast approaching, it's not going to get any easier, believe me. But what are the options? Here's Marcus Gibbs.
There is a housing crisis in Christchurch. Some call it an affordability issue, some call it a challenge. Call it what you like. There are plenty out there keen to make a quick buck from disaster victims. Commentators say it's a supply and demand equation, but it's really a supply and old musty damp dump to desperate citizens, make some good cash and demand rip-off prices. But who's at fault? Can we really blame the landlords for cashing in on the lack of houses? Is it the insurance companies demanding higher premiums? It's probably all of the above, but the situation is getting worse. Christchurch's Deputy Mayor says with the city's housing crisis set to worsen, the council simply can't ignore the problem. The council hopes to join forces with the government to set up an entity to work with private enterprise and boost the number of affordable homes. Vicky Buck says the city has 11,000 to 12,000 homes fewer than it did before the earthquakes. Proposals have been sought for the development of about 275 homes on an 11.5 hectare site in Hornby. Housing developers, builders, iwi and community housing organisations are being invited to respond to how they could provide a mix of housing on the site. But these houses could go for as much as $500,000. So, is that really affordable? The worst is yet to come. As the rebuild picks up, where will the construction workers go? What about families living in temporary housing while their homes are being repaired? And then there's the influx of students wanting to study here. How will they afford it?
Marcus Gibbs reporting there. So how do we solve the housing issues in this city? A man who says he's got some answers is Labour's Phil Twyford. Phil, thanks for joining us on the program.
Hi, Chris.
We saw in that VT there that, people can't afford homes at the moment as it is. Dr Nick Smith came out and said, what about houses between $350,000 to $500,000 in this new Hornby development area? That's hardly affordable though, is it?
There's a housing affordability crisis in Christchurch, and I would have thought $500,000 is not affordable for your average Cantabrian.
So in your view, what is affordable?
I would have thought 250 to 350 is in the range that government should be striving for to deliver, particularly for first home buyers, a crack at the Kiwi dream. People who that's still a lot of money. Let's be clear, for people who are working for a wage and paying tax and bringing up a family. But there's a whole generation of people out there now who a decade ago would have reasonably thought they should have had a chance at owning their own home, and they're now well and truly shut out.
So how do we push those prices down then?
So Labor's answer to this problem is our Kiwi Build policy, which is to use the resources of government to build 10,000 houses a year over a decade. That's across New Zealand. We've said that we're going to front load the Canterbury commitment as a recognition of the crisis that's being experienced by people here. And we're going to build 10,000 affordable starter homes for people in the first 4 years of that program.
This sounds great, but where are you going to get the workers from? We're struggling as it is now. We don't have housing accommodation as it is now, so it's almost a paradox. You feed one monster, you make another one hungry.
It is a problem, and that's precisely why we believe the government should have got off their hands and actually built large numbers of houses after the quakes, and unfortunately they didn't. They passed up an historic opportunity. You know, there was record low interest rates after the global financial crisis.
But to be fair though, we were still experiencing earthquakes 2 years after the effects, so people would say it was unsafe to start building all these homes, not knowing when this drama, when these awful events would probably stop though.
Well, I actually think that the bigger problem was the insurance companies, and what the government should have done is put a rocket under the insurance companies very early on in the piece and made it clear that they expected the insurance companies to pay out promptly and to pay out properly. It's totally unacceptable from Labor's point of view that people have waited 3.5 years for the residential rebuild to get started. In a country like New Zealand, people have put up in some places with third world living conditions for 3 years.
We've got so much to discuss, including rental accommodation. That's next here on Lynched. Stay with us. Welcome back to Lynched. Labor's housing spokesman Phil Twyford is my guest. Phil, the whole notion or the whole buzzwords that we always often hear is smart growth. That's just a buzzword for intensification, isn't it? And smart growth is not all it's cracked out to be.
Well, I think that some of the ideas that are often underlying the term smart growth are worth thinking about. So example,
what is smart growth in your mind?
For me, it means government, central government and local government working together to try to maximise investment from the private sector to deliver the kind of city that works for people, it's livable, it works from a business point of view, and to deliver a city that future generations will love to live in.
It's interesting you said livable, because that's another buzzword, isn't it? Designed to get people to make the right assumptions without thinking. This is what Hugh Pavlich has just said, you know, a housing expert. What is livable, and why do we have to have this notion that everything has to be compact? What is wrong, for example, with urban sprawl?
Well, the problem with urban sprawl is that what it does is that it forces people who, with the least income, to live the furthest away from the city. It creates big costs for local government to invest in the infrastructure, the roads, the water, the electricity, and so on and so forth. It also
But it gives people choices, though. Why would you want to stop people from having choice?
We want choices. We certainly want choices for people. We want choices about affordability. We want the kinds of different housing styles. But if you dump everybody on the fringes of the city, you create not only big infrastructure costs, but you load the transport costs onto those people. Now, if you've got to spend 3/4 of an hour fighting the traffic to get to work every day, that's hundreds of hours every year that you lose forever. Hours that you could spend raising your children, starting a business, getting an education.
But it still comes back to that choice thing, doesn't it? You're still suggesting that people, we shouldn't give them the option. If they want to move out to Selwyn or Waimakariri, let them.
No, I'm certainly not saying that people shouldn't have the choice. But at the moment, in Canterbury, for example, in the context of the rebuild, people haven't been given the choice to live in the central city. The government has utterly failed to bring people back into the central city or to revitalise and redevelop central city suburbs.
But if you do that, don't you run the risk of creating or strangulating land supply, which pushes prices up in the middle?
No, you've got to do both. You need new greenfields land coming into the system, but you also want a city with a heart. And the danger with Christchurch at the moment, the way the government has mismanaged the rebuild, is that you're ending up with a city that's a donut. You've got these massive new residential subdivisions on the fringes of the city with
But they're great.
with very few houses, Chris, that are affordable. Most ordinary Cantabrians, as you were saying before, there's no way they can afford to pay $500,000 or $600,000 for a house. Well, that's the cost that people are having to pay to buy into those new subdivisions on the fringes. If the government got more involved in the development process and provided a diverse range of housing choices, apartments, townhouses, standalone houses, terraces, for people in the central city and in central suburbs like Phillipstown and Opawa, now that would give people real choice.
So are you suggesting if the council restricts land supply, then those in the middle, the prices for their homes won't go up?
I'm not suggesting they restrict land supply. I'm suggesting they much more proactively encourage and facilitate urban renewal in the central city and in the central city suburbs.
That's another buzzword, urban renewal. So what? If people want to go live out in the wop-wops and they want to travel into town to go to work, what is wrong with that, Phil? I don't feel you've answered the question.
Chris, I'm not saying people shouldn't have that choice. I'm saying they are currently...
But you're against that, though?
No, I'm saying they're currently denied the choice of living closer into town and having a more urban lifestyle. At the moment, this government is denying people the choice by forcing them out onto the fringes and to make mansions that they can barely afford, where they have to spend half an hour in the car every morning getting to work. Now, what kind of choice is that?
Dr Nick Smith was down here late last year cutting the ribbon and turning the soil for some new social housing developments in St Albans, $3.3 million or something to that effect. In a way, isn't National almost stepping on Labour's toes? Because they are making small inroads. Do you accept that?
Well, Nick Smith will turn up to the opening of a door handle, and these days the government is so panicky about the housing crisis and what it means in election year for them that he pops up like a jack-in-the-box every day announcing some little scheme here and there. Now, the problem is that the government acted too late and too little, and a few little signature housing projects here and there are not enough to actually counteract the effects of this acute shortage of housing that's put rents and house prices through the roof and created enormous unnecessary pain for Cantabrians. So what they should have done is built thousands and thousands of affordable homes.
Okay, we need to move on from that because obviously what you're saying is they haven't. So what is the answer then? Is it the rebuild program? I'm still concerned that it's all very well to pluck these figures out in the air, 10,000 homes in X amount of years, but the reality is we don't have the workers. What are our options? Are we going to go back to the Philippines and get some more workers to come in, or what are we going to do?
Well, the government's already, because they've failed to invest in apprenticeships and industry training, they've had to import skilled labour from overseas, and probably that's going to have to continue for some time to come. But Labour's committed.
Is there a danger if we employ too many overseas foreigners? The work might not be up to scratch. Do you think that's a real possibility?
I think that's a separate.
Canterbury are saying that.
I think that's a separate issue, and if it is in fact what's happening, then the government needs to do something about it. But the real challenge for us is to train up the young New Zealanders to give them meaningful, skilled, secure, well-paid jobs in the building industry. There are young people who want to work. Well, let's put them to work, and Labor will do that in order to deliver on our promise of 10,000 affordable starter homes over 4 years.
In order to achieve that, you are going to have to throw a lot more money at the trade courses, the polytechs, to achieve this, aren't you?
That's exactly what we're going to do. It will create thousands of new apprenticeships.
I want to move on to rental accommodation in Christchurch. Now, this is one of the biggest subjects in our city at the moment. It's the biggest one for many people on Talkback as well. There are a lot of, how do I put this politely, crap holes on Trade Me that go for, I've had a look myself, $600 for a 3-bedroom dump in Woolston, for example. How on earth can landlords get away with this? And what would you say to those landlords? Would you be in favour, for example, of capping rent? Or does that go down a dangerous Muldoon era?
Well, I think that what we've seen in the last 5 years is a 48% increase in median rents in Christchurch.
That is disgusting. Do you agree with that? It
is absolutely outrageous. It's a direct consequence of the government's failure to adequately build enough houses to deal with the shortage left by the quake.
Is that fair, though? Wasn't it just because we have a supply and demand issue here because of the earthquakes?
Yeah, that's exactly. But
can you really blame the government for that?
It's a crisis caused by the earthquake, but to wait 3.5 years before the residential rebuild gets underway is unforgivable. That is 3.5 years of unnecessary pain that's been caused because the government said we're going to sit on our hands and we're going to let the market somehow magically fix this problem.
Well, the market hasn't fixed itself, that's for sure.
It hasn't fixed it.
So if rental accommodation, you're saying, goes up 38%, then what would you do? How do you get it down then?
Well, the only sustainable, genuine solution is to deal with that supply problem. We have to urgently build a large number of affordable homes and put them into the market so that we bring down the supply and demand pressure that's putting rents through the roof.
But that is not going to help people this winter. There are people doing it tough in caravans, living out in Spencer Park. There are people living in one-bedroom sheds with families. That's a reality for many people, particularly on the east. They can't wait for your government, or if you're in power, or the national government, whatever, to say we're going to build 10,000 homes in X amount of years. They need help now.
Well, I'm shocked to see the kinds of living conditions that people are putting up with. I've seen the rents where people are paying hundreds of dollars a week to live in an uninsulated sleep out. That is totally unacceptable. The problem with the idea of, for instance, rent controls is that you risk actually deterring the very investment that you need to increase the stock. Increasing the stock is the only genuine solution. That's what Labor's committed to. We have a supply and demand problem. We urgently need more houses in the market, more rental properties. That's the overwhelming imperative, and that's what Labor will do.
Do you accept this is probably Christchurch's biggest election topic this year, housing?
I do. I think housing and the rebuild is, from what I can see and what people tell me on the streets of Christchurch, it is the #1 issue. And I think the government is extremely concerned about it. And during the Christchurch East by-election, I did a lot of door knocking in Christchurch East. And as an Aucklander, I have to say that I was shocked to see the condition of the houses, of the streets, and the toll that it had taken on people. 3 years of living in those kinds of conditions.
The other thing that people moan about here in Christchurch, and to be fair, rightfully so, is there was the 100-day blueprint for the CBD, and it looked great. It was a Disneyland dream come true for many investors, despite the fact that no one's investing in the city. But there was no 100-day blueprint for the residents.
Well, I think one of the problems is that the government hasn't put people at the heart of the rebuild. That's the problem. And the number of times I've heard people say, we need a roof over our heads, not a roof over the stadium. And I think that kind of sums it up. The government should have made a priority to bring people back into the central city. That's what would stimulate business and attract investment. And they've really failed to do that. And it's a failure of the government to really encourage and facilitate urban development and private sector investment.
I want to speak to you after the break about what the council's role is in all of this. Phil Twyford, more from him shortly here on Lynched. Welcome back to Lynched. Labor's housing spokesman Phil Twyford is my guest. Phil, your thoughts on this whole long, the land use recovery plan the council's got, where essentially the government's endorsed this, splitting big houses into 2 flats, putting 2 units on vacant house sites, turning granny flats into standalone houses, and letting under 60s into pensioner units. This sounds like a recipe for social disaster.
I think the idea of the land use recovery plan is really good. It's designed to bring all of the councils together with central government, the Ministry for the Environment, Ngāi Tahu and so on, and try to work out a properly integrated plan for the recovery of the region. So
it's a good short-term option, isn't it? But we don't want to see all these granny flats divided into 50 million houses with 28 people living in them, do we?
Well, I don't think we want 28 people living in them. But actually there are a lot of cities around the world, Vancouver is the one that springs to mind, who have done this kind of what they call as sort of gentle intensification really well. So you're providing more housing options, more choices for people in an affordable way while maintaining the quality of your streets and your neighbourhoods. So I think there's some good ideas there. The real problem with the land use recovery plan is that the big development decisions about the rebuild, these massive subdivisions out on the fringes of the city, the emptying out of the red zone, central city and the east, those decisions have been made. They're a done deal now. And really what the LURP, the Land Use Recovery Plan, is doing is trying to fix up the bits all around those areas. So the real problem here is the government let go of this thing over the last couple of years, and the big development decisions have already been made.
Is that such a bad thing though? Because somebody had to make a decision on development, whether it's out in the forests of Burwood or here in the central city.
Sure, people need a place to live, they need town centres, they need places to work, but we think it would have been better, and still actually would be better, if the government rolled up its sleeves and did more to revitalise the central city. We think that would have been better for Christchurch, more affordable housing, more options for living. And it's not too late for them to do that.
So what is your priority then to deal with the housing crisis in the city? What is the top priority for Labor then?
Top priority is to build 10,000 affordable starter homes for first home buyers in 4 years.
Do you think you can achieve that?
I do, absolutely confident we can do that. We're going to build more state houses. We're going to look at more emergency housing. You know, there are a lot of people...
What about for the middle income bracket though, Phil?
The middle income bracket is the Kiwi Build policy, really. It's those people who will be able to afford to buy these starter homes. But a lot of the people who've been forgotten are the ones you mentioned before, Chris, the people who are living in caravans and sleepouts, who are officially homeless under the official government definition. There are upwards of 5,000 of those people in Canterbury now. And we have a woeful lack of emergency housing, and I think the government needs to look at that. Housing New Zealand could help out, but many of the NGOs and community groups could provide short-term support, put a decent roof over a family's head, and work with them to get them over a few months into a more longer-term option.
You got a message for greedy landlords or property managers that like to screw as much money out of decent, hard-working Cantabs as practically possible?
Yeah, show some heart, treat people with dignity, and if you're going to charge several $100s a week to put a roof over a family's head, make sure it's insulated, make sure it's dry and warm at least.
What about the warrant of fitness finally? You'd be in favour of all homes, all residential or rental accommodation getting warrant of fitnesses? Surely that's a good option.
You know, Chris, we're going to change the law and set minimum standards for all rental properties, whether they're state houses or whether they're private rentals, so that they have to be warm and dry.
Labour's Phil Twyford, appreciate your time tonight. Thanks for joining me on Lynched. Well, plenty of feedback on Facebook this week. I asked whether you believe psychic medium Calvin Cruikshank can really talk to the dead. You see, he was in Christchurch a few weeks back, and I was left less than impressed, that's for sure. Tracy Simpson says the only thing Calvin believes in is top dollar. His shows are expensive and his performances are complete and utter shams and shameful. Wendy Thomas says, I saw Calvin once and was impressed by him. I never got any readings out of him, but others left the theatre looking happy, so leave him alone. Thank you for that. Sandy Baker says, real mediums don't take money for their gifts because they know they're doing good work, so go figure. And thanks for your feedback. Keep it coming at facebook.com/Lynched in NZ. Well, finally tonight, some final comments on Calvin Cruikshank, the man who calls himself a gifted psychic medium who acts as a bridge between the physical and spiritual worlds. He claims he can see dead people, but all he really sees are the dollar signs from people willing to pay him $65 to see him perform a remarkable mind control show. I saw him at the Aurora Centre a few weeks back. I was genuinely impressed with his ability to entertain the crowd. He was funny, he was engaging, and his knowledge of important Canterbury issues was actually quite commendable. But can he speak to the so-called spirit world? Well, you see, he picked out a grieving mother and daughter from the audience. The sad part about this is that they were all too willing to throw personal details of their loved one to Calvin, while he ensured he took all credit for talking to the dead. He informed the young girl that the spirit was actually telling her to drive slowly and poking fun at her for driving like a grandma. She looked confused by this and told Calvin she's the exact opposite and drives far too fast. Calvin wasn't rattled by this at all. If ever the professional, he quickly flipped the suggestion around, saying the spirit was actually telling her to drive very slowly like a grandma. Good day. The spirit was just playing with me, he said. Oh, the irony. Having said that, the principles of these types of performances remind me of the similar shows you see at Pentecostal churches. If you want to believe and you feel better for attending, then I guess that's nothing wrong with that, is there? Or is there? That's this week's show. Good night.